A 9-year-old boy in Chicago was shot and killed after he was lured into an alleyway. Tyshawn Lee was the victim, and authorities allege that his father is involved in a gang that's retaliating against another gang, which is why this has happened. Now, these are all allegations. They're not hard facts. However, according to the Associated Press, Tyshawn Lee, an elementary school student, headed to his grandmother's house. He was shot in the head and back Monday in a neighborhood alley on the city's south side. According to authorities, they're trying to speak to his father to get answers about what's going on to see if they can find any suspects. But they claim that the father is not cooperating with them. However, Pierre Stokes, who's the father of the victim, says that's not true. He says, "I answered every question they asked me. They're not asking me questions that I know. I don't know the questions they asked me." He also claims that they're more interested in finding out about his alleged gang history as opposed to finding the person who shot and killed his son. Now, I looked into some homicide numbers from Chicago this year alone, and just to give you a sense of how bad things are right now, there were 428 homicides through the beginning of November. When it comes to suspects, there were no suspects in 305 of those homicides.
Okay, now, look, part of the reason for that is because people won't cooperate with the police.
Right.
Now, that's a vicious circle. They don't trust the cops. Some of that is earned distrust, but most of it is not that. If you ask me, it's my opinion. Most of it is, it's a code, so we don't, snitches get stitches, right? And so they don't rat each other out. That's great. You know, have people get murdered instead, but you don't rat anyone. I think that people getting murdered is a slightly bigger moral problem than you being a snitch, right? But part of the reason that they're worried about quote unquote snitching is because then they'll get killed, right? So this is a vicious cycle. Now it's gotten uglier. So because of the drug wars, we've had these gangs coming out of Central America, Mexico, and some other countries where they are doing decapitations, right? And they are killing people's kids and their family members. I mean, this started, a while back in Colombia, but by the way, the other time they used to do it is during the other prohibition, when we had the other gangs, Capone's gang, etc., and they'd also kill your family members. Because when there is that much money to be made, people will do anything. Now that's spilled over to our side. It's happening in Chicago, so it's not a surprise apparently to people, and they don't really care if it happens in Mexico, it happens in Chicago. We're all outraged, and we should be outraged, and we can't let it happen any further, right? It is super important that they catch this guy and they make an example of the people who did this and who ordered it, right? And bring them to justice. Don't make an example by killing them. Bring them to justice,
right?
And let the justice system handle it. But so now, oftentimes when this happens, Fox News will jump out and go, "Where's the community? It's black on black violence. They're not doing anything about it." So let me preemptively say they're doing a lot about it. The community's gotten together. They've got a $35,000 reward for catching whoever did this. Reverend Michael Flegger, who's a priest at St. Sabina, who's a Southside Roman Catholic Church, has said, "I will do anything to help, and I will offer money out of my own pocket to make sure that we catch the guy, and if we have to, the person who gave the information will pay for their relocation." Because they're realistic. They get it. Like, there could be consequences. They're like, "We will help you in every way, but we've got to catch the person who did this." And that's the community saying that. And the overwhelming majority of the community want to work with the cops to find out who did this. I don't know anything about the dad. Obviously, I have no idea if he's in a gang, et cetera. We don't know if he's got good intentions, bad intentions. His son got killed. I'm pretty sure he's upset about that. How he's going to deal with that, we have no idea.
Now, let's remember the Chicago mayor lost his fight. It was Mayor Daley to get rid of guns in Chicago. The NRA beat him, and the courts ruled against them and said you can't ban guns in the city and all that stuff. So now they have guns. So now what you've done is you've taken out the economic base, right? And you've moved in drugs, right, as their economic motor engine, and you've poured a bunch of guns on top of it. And this is the result of that.
Yeah, I mean, the point that I wanted to make is that gangs don't just come out of nowhere. Like, people aren't inherently evil and they're not inherently violent. They're not looking to cause trouble. Gangs are a direct product of policies in the United States. So the war on drugs is one of those policies. Income inequality is another policy. Institutional racism that keeps people in lower socioeconomic statuses is another thing. All of these things play a role in why people end up in gangs.
Right.
They do it for survival. And it might sound counterproductive because all these people are getting killed, but for a lot of people living in areas of Chicago, they feel like they don't have a choice.
So for people that will be skeptical about that, like, oh, what do you mean you don't have a choice? That's because you grew up somewhere else. I was skeptical about that when I was a Republican. I was like, they have all the choice in the world. Why don't they go to Harvard? I was that stupid, right? Because everybody I grew up with in a nice suburb, well, they knew to get an education. They knew they could go to good schools and they could be anything they wanted, accountant, doctor, whatever you want, right? Then when I got to know more people that lived in inner cities, lived in different environments, they were like, hey, you knucklehead. They literally don't know that. They have no idea that they can get a higher education, et cetera. What do they know? They know the local economy. And the local economy is powered by the drug trade. And so we keep talking about the Fox News is constantly talking about Chicago, black on black violence, Chicago, look at all this. And in Chicago, they have some gun regulation. First of all, they can't ban the guns. They have some gun regulation. Wow. And then we live in an ocean of guns that surround them. How easy is it to walk into Chicago with a gun that you just bought in the neighboring state? Yeah. It's the easiest thing in the world. We're swimming in guns. But to me, that isn't the main culprit in this case. So guns are killing people, obviously, left and right, and we've talked a lot about that. It's Chicago. It's like, think about it for a second, okay? Where were the biggest gangs during the last Prohibition? Chicago, right? And at the time, they happened to be white gangs, right? Capone, Irish, Jewish, Italian, right? And at the time, people were talking about, oh, those immigrant cultures. That's the problem with the Italian culture, the Irish culture. And now we're talking about the problem with black culture. No, that was the economy that existed in Chicago because of Prohibition. And those were businessmen, now lethal, horrible, immoral businessmen, but that's what they did. And right now we have the same exact thing in this new Prohibition, again, in Chicago.
Yeah, and I'd also say that, and you're right, the economic engine is what drives it, but I'd also say that those kids in these areas grow up with the real power brokers being in these gangs. I mean, the people they look up to, because after all, they're, as Cenk has said, their vision is only 3 feet in front of them. Those power brokers are all the drug dealers and all the power brokers within the community who are intimidators, and they also have the money. And in a sense, it's like little militias working there in the Chicago neighborhood. So, I think Anna said it right. I mean, you essentially went down the list of all the contributing factors that led to this incident. It's in essence a symptom of all those things that you mentioned.